The last time I saw him, he was just a boy, awkward, quiet, barely acknowledging my presence at family gatherings. But years had passed, and when he walked through the door that evening, I hardly recognized him. He had grown tall, his posture confident, his voice deeper than I remembered. His eyes, sharp yet warm, lingered on me longer than they should have. I brushed it off. After all, it had been years since we last met. He was just being polite. The dinner table was filled with laughter and conversation, but I couldn't ignore the way he kept looking at me, as if studying my every move. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone of familiarity that unsettled me. "You haven't changed a bit," he said, smiling. "Still as graceful as ever." I laughed, dismissing the compliment. "That's sweet of you to say, but time catches up with everyone." He shook his head. "Not you." A strange warmth crept up my neck, and I quickly looked away, focusing on my plate. My husband was too busy talking to his son to notice the exchange, but I felt something shift in the air. After dinner, I stepped outside for some fresh air, hoping to shake the feeling. Moments later, I heard footsteps behind me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The night was quiet, the distant hum of crickets the only sound filling the silence. "I used to think you were distant," he admitted after a pause. "Back when I was younger. But maybe I just never tried to know you." I turned to him, surprised by his honesty. "You were a child. You had no reason to." He smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe I was just too intimidated." A strange tension settled between us. It wasn't something I could name, but it was there. I reminded myself that he was family, my stepgrandson. That was all. But as the night went on, as he shared stories of his life, his struggles, his dreams, I saw him in a way I hadn't before. He wasn't the quiet, awkward boy I once knew. He was a man now. And that realization unsettled me more than anything. As we stood there under the soft glow of the porch light, he looked at me with something unspoken in his eyes. Something that made my heart race in a way it shouldn't have. "I'm glad we got to talk," he said, his voice lower now. "I've always wanted to." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Me too." But as I walked back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. And deep down, I knew that whatever it was, it had only just begun. In the days that followed, he started coming around more often. At first, it seemed innocent. He'd stop by to see his father, catch up with the family, share a meal. But slowly, his visits became more personal. One afternoon, he arrived unexpectedly while I was alone. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, standing at the door with that same confident smile. "Of course not," I replied, though something in my chest tightened. He handed me a small bag. "I saw this and thought of you." Inside was a book, an old classic I had once mentioned in passing. I ran my fingers over the cover, speechless. "You remembered?" "Of course," he said. "I always listen when you speak." Something about the way he said it unsettled me. I thanked him, placing the book aside, trying to ignore the warmth creeping up my neck. From then on, he found reasons to linger. He'd offer to help with small chores, insist on carrying things for me, ask for advice about work, relationships, life. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, just a young man seeking guidance. But then came the moments that felt different. The way his eyes stayed on mine a little too long. The way his fingers brushed against mine when he handed me something. The way he leaned in just slightly when we spoke, as if drawn to me. One evening, as we sat in the garden talking, he sighed, looking up at the sky. "You ever feel like you're stuck in a life that isn't really yours?" His words hit me harder than I expected. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quieter than before. "I feel that way a lot," he confessed. "Like I don't belong anywhere. Like I'm just searching." There was something raw in his voice, something that made me forget, just for a moment, who we were supposed to be to each other. "I understand," I said, and I meant it. A silence stretched between us, heavy yet comfortable. Then, suddenly, he reached out, his fingers barely grazing my hand. It was a fleeting touch, over before I could react, but it left a trail of warmth in its wake. My breath hitched, and I pulled my hand away, standing up too quickly. It's getting late, I said, forcing a lightness into my voice. I should start dinner. He looked up at me, searching my face for something, permission, perhaps. But I couldn't give it to him. Yeah, he said finally, standing as well. I should go. As he walked away, I exhaled, pressing a hand against my chest. This was dangerous. Whatever this was, it had to stop. But as I watched him disappear into the night, I couldn't deny the truth clawing its way into my heart. I didn't want it to. I avoided him for days, telling myself it was for the best. I needed space to clear my head, to remind myself of the boundaries that should never be crossed. But the more I tried to push it away, the more I thought about him, his words, his touch, the way his presence made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. Then one evening he came again. This time, he didn't pretend it was about seeing his family. He came for me. You've been avoiding me, he said the moment I opened the door. I hesitated, gripping the frame. I've just been busy. That's not true, he said softly. Did I do something wrong? I exhaled, looking away. This isn't right. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. Then why does it feel like it is? My pulse quickened. I knew I should send him away, remind him of the roles we played in this family. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something I couldn't ignore, longing, sincerity, a pull I didn't have the strength to fight. Say the word, and I'll leave, he whispered. I opened my mouth, but no words came. His fingers brushed against mine, testing the space between us. When I didn't move, he took another step forward. I think about you all the time, he admitted. I don't care what anyone says. I know what I feel. My breath caught. You don't understand what you're doing. I do, he insisted. I know this isn't supposed to happen, but I can't help it. And I don't think you can either. His hand came up, barely grazing my cheek. The moment his skin touched mine, a shiver ran through me. It would be so easy to close the distance, to let this moment consume us. Then, reality hit me like a crashing wave. I stepped back, shaking my head. No. This is a mistake. His expression fell. You don't mean that. I do. I forced steel into my voice, though it wavered at the edges. You're young. You're confused. And I should have stopped this before it even began. He clenched his jaw, pain flickering across his face. So that's it? You're just going to pretend none of this ever happened. I swallowed hard. Yes. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might reach for me again, but then he nodded stiffly, stepping back. If that's what you want. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He turned and walked away, and as I stood there, heart pounding, I told myself I had done the right thing. So why did it feel like I had lost something I would never get back? Days passed and he didn't return. I told myself it was for the best, that I had put an end to something that should never have started. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I found myself listening for his footsteps, waiting for a knock that never came. Then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. His father was speaking, his voice filled with amusement. That boy's got away with words. You wouldn't believe it. He's been visiting an older woman, charming her like he's lived 100 lifetimes. Says she doesn't stand a chance. I froze. My stomach twisted. Who? Someone asked. His father chuckled. Some woman he met through a friend. Twice his age. Says he likes the challenge. The world around me blurred. The weight in my chest wasn't just shock. It was betrayal, humiliation, shame. I had convinced myself what happened between us had meaning, that it was some rare, undeniable pull neither of us could control. But I was wrong. He wasn't lost, searching, or confused. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I had been foolish enough to believe it. That evening, when he finally appeared at my door, I felt none of the emotions I once had. No longing, no hesitation. Just cold clarity. He smiled, as if nothing had changed. I was beginning to think you'd never talk to me again. I held his gaze, my voice steady. I know about her. For the first time, his confidence faltered. What? Don't lie to me, I said. I know about the other woman. I know I wasn't the only one. His expression shifted, shock, then something else. An emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't like that, he said quickly. She doesn't mean anything to me. And I did. My voice didn't shake, even though everything inside me did. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You were different. I let his words hang between us, waiting to see if they carried any truth. But all I saw was a boy who played a game he thought he had already won. You made me feel special, I said, my voice quieter now. Like this was real. It was, he insisted. I nodded slowly, then stepped back. Not anymore. His lips parted as if to argue, but he saw something in my face that made him stop. Maybe he realized there was nothing left to say. After a long moment, he gave a single nod, then turned and walked away. This time, I didn't watch him go. I closed the door, locking it behind me, and stood there in the silence. I had almost let myself believe in something dangerous, something that had never been meant for me. But I knew better now, and I would never make that mistake again.